"You'll embarrass everyone. Don't come." My mother said it standing in my kitchen in Austin, 5 days before my brother's wedding, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her ivory blazer like she was already rehearsing how she'd look in photos. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept glancing at the marble countertops, the stainless steel appliances, anything but me. "This isn't about you, Madeline," she added quickly. "It's about the Grant family. Their reputation, their connections, Ethan's future." Olivia Grant, 26, polished, strategic, daughter of a family that owned one of the largest construction companies in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of people my mother had always admired from a distance and now desperately wanted to stand beside. "I just don't want any tension," she continued. "You know how direct you can be. The Grants value refinement." Refinement. That was the word she used instead of difficult or blunt or embarrassing. I stood there, 31 years old in my own home, being told I was a liability to my brother's wedding. For a second I considered arguing, reminding her that I was her daughter, not a public relations risk. But I'd learned something over the years. Arguing only confirmed her narrative, so I smiled. Calm, controlled. "I won't be there," I said. Her shoulders relaxed instantly, like a crisis had been avoided. She thought she had just protected the family image. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. After she left, the house felt too quiet. The air conditioner hummed. My coffee had gone cold on the counter. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop and tried to decide whether I felt hurt or relieved. Probably both. Ethan had texted earlier that morning. "I'm sorry about Mom." That was it. No invitation, no pushback, no, "I want you there anyway." Just an apology wrapped in resignation. I knew he was under pressure. The wedding wasn't just a ceremony, it was a merger. The Carter name linking with the Grant empire. Texas energy projects meeting East Coast capital. Olivia's family had recently expanded into Austin. New developments, new contracts. My mother saw this wedding as an ascension, and I was apparently a threat to that climb. I closed my laptop, then opened it again. Instead of replaying the conversation in my head, I searched flights. If I wasn't invited to my own brother's wedding, I wasn't going to sit at home pretending it didn't matter. Vancouver caught my eye. Cool air, ocean views, distance. The wedding was Saturday afternoon in the Texas Hill Country. I booked a flight leaving that morning. When I clicked confirm, my bank balance dipped lower than I liked. It felt impulsive, almost reckless, but staying would have felt worse. 2 years ago, at a charity gala, my mother had physically guided me away from a conversation with potential investors. I'd been discussing renewable energy tax credits with one of them, Ethan's field. She leaned in and whispered, "Just smile and don't speak." That night, I learned something important. In her world, silence was more valuable than substance. I wasn't going to volunteer for that role again. On the morning of the wedding, I drove to Austin Bergstrom International Airport while my family gathered at a vineyard outside Fredericksburg. The group chat buzzed relentlessly. Photos of floral arrangements, crystal glassware, Olivia's rehearsal dinner dress. I muted the thread. If they didn't want me there, they didn't get my emotional labor either. By the time I landed in Vancouver, the Texas heat had been replaced with cool coastal air. Stanley Park stretched along the water like a deep breath I didn't know I needed. I walked along the seawall, watching cyclists pass, families taking photos, seaplanes lifting into the gray-blue sky. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. Maybe this was better. Maybe absence was power. I sat on a bench overlooking the water and pulled out my phone, mostly out of habit. Notifications stacked across the screen. Missed calls from Mom, from Dad, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them. Instead, I opened TikTok. The first video autoplayed before I could scroll. Shaky camera, wedding reception, familiar stone archway in the background. My mother's voice, sharp, unmistakable. The caption read, "You won't believe what the bride just did." And then I saw Olivia raise her hand, Olivia's hand connected with my mother's cheek so hard the sound cut through the music. The room in the video froze. A champagne flute shattered somewhere off camera. For half a second, no one moved. Then Olivia leaned forward and spat directly into my mother's face. A collective gasp rippled through the reception like a shockwave. I watched it on a park bench in Vancouver, the Pacific wind brushing against my hair, while strangers walked past me unaware that my family was imploding in front of millions. My mother stood there stunned, mascara perfect, dignity dissolving under fluorescent ballroom lights. Ethan rushed forward too late, his tuxedo jacket pulling awkwardly at his shoulders as he reached for Olivia's arm. Someone near the camera whispered, "This is going viral." They were right. The hashtag was already forming under the video. Hashtag #SlapGateWedding. The clip had been posted 20 minutes earlier. It already had tens of thousands of views. Comments poured in so fast I couldn't read them all. Rich family meltdown. She defended herself. That mother-in-law deserved it. Bride just ruined her own wedding. I replayed the moment again. Slap, pause, spit. What unsettled me wasn't just the violence. It was Olivia's expression seconds before it happened. Calm, composed, focused. My phone vibrated in my hand. Mom calling, then Dad, then 3 unknown numbers. The family group chat exploded with fragmented messages. Call me. Do not respond publicly. We need to control this. Control? That was always the first instinct. I let it ring. 5 days ago, I had been told I would embarrass everyone. Now they needed me. I was about to slide my phone back into my bag when another call came through. Unknown number, Texas area code. I answered. Madeline? Ethan's voice sounded hollow, like he was speaking from underwater. I'm here, I said. She lost it, he whispered. It just escalated. Mom said something about investors and I don't even know, Olivia just snapped. I watched the video again, focusing on the seconds before the slap. My mother's posture was rigid, but Olivia's face didn't look like someone losing control. It looked like someone calculating. Where is she now? I asked. She left the reception, he said. Got into a car. She won't answer me. She's texting nonstop. My screen lit up with forwarded messages. You belong to me. You humiliated me in front of everyone. This isn't over. If you think you can walk away from this, you're wrong. My stomach tightened. Ethan, I said carefully, what aren't you telling me? There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough that I could hear wind against his phone. There's more at stake, he said finally. My mind went still. What do you mean? We signed a prenup, he said, a few weeks ago. That didn't surprise me. The Grant family didn't breathe without a contract. What's in it? He exhaled slowly. It's complicated. I almost laughed at the familiarity of that word. Complicated how? If the marriage ends because of public damage to her reputation, his voice cracked slightly. I owe her $3 million. The Vancouver skyline blurred in my vision. What? And there's another clause, he continued, the words tumbling out now. If the marriage collapses within the first year, and it affects her family's company, I have to transfer my equity in the renewable energy project. The project he'd spent 4 years building. How much is it worth? I asked, even though I already feared the answer. $8 million. The wind off the water suddenly felt colder. Did you read it carefully before signing? I asked. I skimmed it, he admitted. Olivia said it was standard. Her lawyers handled everything. She said involving separate counsel would make it look like I didn't trust her. Trust. I replayed the slap again in my head. Public humiliation. Cameras everywhere. Viral amplification. Ethan, I said quietly, who benefits from this video? He didn't answer. In the TikTok comments, people were already debating who was at fault. Some blamed my mother, others blamed Olivia. But no one was talking about contracts, or reputation clauses, or financial penalties triggered by scandal. This wasn't just a meltdown, I said slowly. What are you saying? He asked. I watched the clip one more time, slowing it down with my thumb. Olivia stepped into full view of at least 3 raised phones before she struck. It might have been a move, I said. And for the first time since the wedding began, I wasn't thinking about embarrassment. I was thinking about leverage. The email arrived with a sterile subject line. Grant Carter _marital _agreement _final. I was sitting in a small cafe near Cole Harbor, my coffee untouched, Vancouver's gray skyline stretching across the window. I downloaded the attachment and stared at the page count. 42 pages. That wasn't a romantic precaution. That was a corporate shield. I opened the document and began reading. The first paragraph referenced protection of brand integrity and family reputation. Not love, not partnership, brand integrity. Every other page seemed to circle back to one idea: reputational harm. Clause 5.2 defined conduct damaging to bride's public image. The language was broad: public embarrassment, viral controversy, media scandal connected to the groom or his family. My chest tightened. Clause 7.4 was worse. If the marriage dissolved due to actions that harmed the bride's public reputation, Ethan would owe $3 million in compensatory damages. The clause didn't require proof of fault, only that public perception had shifted negatively. I scrolled further. Page 37 held a supplemental agreement, buried, dense, legalistic. If the marriage ended within 12 months and public scandal materially impacted Grant Construction Holdings, Ethan would be required to transfer his equity stake in his renewable energy project. Estimated value: $8 million. The words felt unreal. I replayed the wedding video in my mind. Olivia stepping forward. Cameras already up. My mother raising her voice. The slap, the spit. Public scandal, viral amplification. My phone buzzed with a forwarded message from Ethan. You embarrassed me in front of investors. Everything is documented. That last line sat heavier than the rest. I called him immediately. Did you have your own lawyer review this? I asked. Silence. Ethan. No, he admitted. Olivia said it would complicate things. She said it would make her parents nervous, that it would delay the wedding. When did you sign it? 3 weeks ago. Where? At her family's attorney's office, in Charlotte. So, not neutral ground. What happened that day? I pressed. He hesitated. I could hear the memory forming. She cried, he said finally. Said her family had been through lawsuits before, that they needed security. She told me if I loved her I wouldn't hesitate. Love used as leverage. Did you feel like you could walk away? I asked. No. That single word told me everything. I closed my eyes and went back to the video in my head. Olivia didn't look unstable before the slap. She looked prepared, her posture squared, her face composed. She stepped directly into camera range. I reopened the document and read the clause again. Reputational harm as determined by public perception. Public perception didn't care about nuance. It cared about viral footage. What if she wanted documentation? I said slowly. What do you mean? Ethan asked. What if she needed proof of public damage? He exhaled sharply. You think she planned it? I think she knew cameras were rolling, I said. And I think she understood exactly what the prenup required. He didn't argue. Another text came through from Olivia while we were on the phone. You signed it. It's enforceable. My stomach flipped. Send me everything, I said. Every message, every email. I need a timeline. I feel like an idiot, he whispered. You're not, I said firmly. You're manipulated. I scrolled back to the beginning of the agreement and noticed something else, a reference to prior litigation involving Grant affiliates. I remembered reading a headline years ago about a tech startup connected to the Grant name. Something about a civil dispute. Ethan, I said, did Olivia ever mention a lawsuit from her last company? No. What lawsuit? Exactly. I closed the document and opened a new tab. If this was a pattern, I was going to find it. Because this wasn't chaos. This was structure. And structure leaves traces. The air in Austin felt thicker when I stepped out of the airport that night, like the humidity itself was pressing down on my chest. I drove straight to my parents' house in Westlake Hills. The lights were on in every room, blinds half closed as if the house were trying to hide from the outside world. News vans were parked discreetly down the street. Mom opened the door before I knocked. Her makeup was flawless again, hair smoothed, pearls in place. The only sign of the slap was a faint redness along her cheekbone. "They're destroying us online," she said without greeting me. Dad stood in the living room, watching a cable news segment replay the wedding footage. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders slumped, staring at his phone like it might explode. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Wedding slap scandal, sparks debate over elite family drama." Debate. Mom turned to me. "The Grants are furious. Their attorneys have already called." "I'm sure they have," I said calmly. Before anyone could respond, headlights flashed across the front windows. Ethan's head snapped up. "She said she might come," he murmured. A sleek black SUV rolled into the driveway. Olivia stepped out as if she were attending a press conference instead of walking into the house she'd detonated. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture straight. No visible remorse. "I need to speak to Ethan," she said as she walked inside, her voice cool. "Not alone," I said. She gave me a brief glance, measuring. "This is between husband and wife." The word husband hung in the air. Ethan followed her into the study. I lingered just outside the partially closed door and slipped my phone into record mode. Her voice changed the second the door clicked shut. "You've made this worse," she said sharply. "Going silent like this." "I didn't make anything worse," Ethan replied. "You hit my mother." "She provoked me," Olivia snapped. "And honestly, the video worked out better than expected." My pulse spiked. "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means people love drama," she said. "It shifts attention. It gives us leverage." Leverage. "If this marriage collapses because of your family's behavior," she continued, "that's on you. You signed the agreement." "The agreement?" "You said it was just protection," Ethan said weakly. "It is," she replied, "for me." Her tone sharpened. "You embarrassed me in front of investors. Do you understand what that does to my brand?" "Brand?" I stepped into the doorway. "Your brand?" I asked evenly. She turned, her expression flickering for half a second before resetting. "This doesn't concern you, Madeline." "It concerns me when you imply that a viral incident benefits you," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "You're twisting my words." "No," I replied. "I'm listening carefully." Ethan looked between us, pale. "You told me public evidence matters," he said quietly. Olivia's jaw tightened. "Of course it matters. Perception matters. That's how the world works." "And if perception damages you?" I asked. "Then there are consequences," she said. "For who?" I pressed. "For anyone responsible." There it was, the prenup clause in human form. She stepped closer to Ethan. "You signed it. It's enforceable. If this falls apart publicly, you know what that means. $3 million. $8 million in equity." She didn't need to say the numbers. They hovered between them like smoke. "Did you plan for cameras to be rolling?" I asked. She laughed softly. "This was a wedding. There were 200 guests. Of course there were cameras." "That's not what I asked." Her composure slipped just slightly. "Your mother insulted my family," she said. "I defended myself." "By ensuring documentation?" I asked. Her silence lasted too long. "You're out of your depth," she finally said. "My family doesn't lose." She turned toward the door. "This isn't over," she added. The SUV taillights disappeared down the street minutes later. Inside the house, the air felt different. Not scandal-struck, strategic. I replayed the recording alone in the kitchen. The line was clear. "The video worked out better than expected." That wasn't emotional instability, that was calculation, and calculation could be dismantled. I was up before sunrise, seated at my parents' dining table with Olivia's voice echoing in my head. The video worked out better than expected. That wasn't the sentence of someone who lost control. It was the sentence of someone who anticipated outcome. I opened my laptop and began digging. Olivia Grant's public profile was polished to the point of sterility. Philanthropy boards, young executive awards, strategic expansion into Texas markets. Every headline positioned her as disciplined and visionary. But buried under older search results, past page 4 of the results most people never reach, was something else. 2 years ago, she had co-founded a tech startup in Raleigh. The company promised infrastructure analytics powered by AI. Within 18 months, investors filed a civil lawsuit alleging misrepresentation of projected earnings. The case had been dismissed, but not publicly defended, settled quietly. I pulled up archived court filings and skimmed summaries. Allegations of inflated valuation, strategic pressure on co-founders, public confrontation during board meetings that allegedly forced one partner into resignation. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn connection request I'd sent hours earlier being accepted. The former operations manager from that startup agreed to a short call. "She's brilliant," the woman said carefully, "but she plays 3 moves ahead, always." "Did she ever escalate publicly during disputes?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes," she admitted. "She once staged a confrontation in front of investors to force a buyout decision. She made sure witnesses were present." Witnesses, documentation, public narrative. I ended the call and stared at my notes. Pattern behavior. This wasn't about my mother's temper. It was about leverage. By mid-morning, I was seated across from a family law attorney in downtown Austin. Her office overlooked the river, glass walls reflecting a city that thrived on negotiation. I laid the prenup on her desk. Then I played the recording. She didn't interrupt once. When it finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Reputation-based penalty clauses are enforceable," she said, "unless you can prove duress." "Does this qualify?" I asked. "Possibly," she replied. He signed under emotional pressure, without independent counsel in her attorney's office weeks before the ceremony. That's significant. And the viral incident? If it can be shown that it was escalated intentionally to trigger the clause, that changes everything. My phone buzzed again. An email from a Grant family attorney. Subject line, "Formal notice." Attached was a cease and desist letter accusing our family of defamation and reputational sabotage. It warned that any misrepresentation of events would result in litigation. It also referenced Ethan's renewable energy project by name. Subtle intimidation. When I returned to my parents' house, Mom was pacing. "They're threatening to destroy us," she said. "No," I corrected calmly. "They're threatening to protect themselves." Ethan sat at the kitchen island, eyes red from lack of sleep. "She told me not to involve my own lawyer," he said quietly. "She said it would look like I didn't trust her. She cried, said her parents needed assurance." "Did she discourage you from talking to anyone else about it?" I asked. He nodded. "She said outside advice would complicate things." Isolation. Emotional leverage. I reopened the timeline. Lawsuit settlement finalized in early spring. Engagement announcement 3 months later. Prenup signed 3 weeks before wedding. Public wedding confrontation in front of 200 guests and dozens of cameras. The pieces aligned too neatly to be coincidence. "If the marriage ends under public scandal," I said slowly, "she gains financial advantage. If Ethan stays silent, she controls the narrative." Mom stopped pacing. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting this wasn't a meltdown," I said. "It was positioning." Before anyone could respond, another news alert flashed across my screen. Grant heiress claims self-defense in wedding incident. Olivia had already given a statement. She was shaping the story. And if we didn't respond strategically, the clause she designed might become a weapon. This was no longer about family embarrassment. It was about financial survival, and I had no intention of letting her write the ending. We met at my attorney's office just after 9 in the morning, sunlight cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a spotlight on a negotiation table. Olivia's statement had been circulating all night. She acted in self-defense after enduring repeated provocation, the press release read. Any suggestion of financial motive is defamatory. My lawyer tapped the prenup with one manicured finger. She tied financial penalty to public reputational damage, she said. If the public sees her as unstable, the clause weakens. If the public sees her as victimized, it strengthens. So we shift perception, I said. Ethan sat rigid beside me. I don't want this to turn into a circus, he muttered. It already is, I replied gently. The only question is who controls the ring. He exhaled slowly. What do we do? You tell the truth, my lawyer said, but carefully. By noon, we had agreed to a controlled interview with a respected investigative journalist in Austin. No tabloids, no emotional ranting, just documentation. Ethan looked pale when the cameras were set up in my parents' living room. You don't have to do this, I told him quietly. Yes, I do, he said. If I stay silent, it looks like guilt. The journalist asked measured questions. When did you sign the prenuptial agreement? 3 weeks before the wedding, Ethan said. Did you have independent legal counsel? No. Why not? He hesitated. I was told it would signal distrust. And the clause regarding reputational harm? His jaw tightened. It requires me to pay $3 million if the marriage dissolves due to public scandal that affects her image. There's also an equity transfer clause tied to her family's company. The journalist's eyebrow lifted slightly. Were you aware of the financial implications fully when you signed? I wasn't advised independently, he replied carefully, and I was under emotional pressure. We didn't accuse Olivia directly. We didn't need to. Documentation speaks louder than accusation. When the interview aired that evening, it spread almost as fast as the wedding video had. The hashtag began to shift. Hashtag #SlapGateWedding transformed into debates about financial manipulation and coercion. A former employee from Olivia's startup posted publicly. She thrives in public pressure scenarios, the woman wrote. This doesn't surprise me. Within hours, Grant Construction Holdings released a new statement. They emphasized corporate stability and distance from personal disputes. They noted that Olivia's role in executive decisions was being temporarily reviewed. Mom stared at the screen in disbelief. They're distancing themselves from her, she whispered. They're protecting shareholders, I corrected. Ethan's phone vibrated. A text from Olivia. You've made a mistake. Another followed. You think you can humiliate me publicly and walk away? Then I will enforce the agreement. My lawyer responded before Ethan could. A formal notice of intent to challenge enforceability due to coercion and misrepresentation. The legal tone was icy, precise. That night, I watched Olivia's social media accounts. Posts disappeared, comments were limited. Her polished narrative began to fracture. Talk shows shifted the conversation. Is reputational harm being weaponized in modern prenups? One panelist asked. Another said, if coercion is proven, the contract may not hold. For the first time since the slap, I felt the power dynamic tilt. Mom approached me quietly in the kitchen. I thought I understood powerful families, she said. I thought aligning with them protected us. It doesn't protect you, I said softly. It just changes who controls you. She looked older in that moment. Dad stepped into the room, phone in hand. The Grant attorneys want to talk, he said. My lawyer's phone rang seconds later. She answered on speaker. We are open to discussing resolution, the Grant representative said, voice clipped and corporate. Open, not threatening, not aggressive, open. When the call ended, my lawyer met my eyes. They're worried, she said. I allowed myself a slow breath. Olivia had relied on public humiliation as leverage. Now public scrutiny was closing in on her, and leverage cuts both ways. The settlement call came late on a Thursday afternoon, my attorney's office quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the faint rush of traffic below. We were seated around the conference table when her phone lit up with the Grant family's number. She put it on speaker. "We are prepared to discuss mutual dissolution," the voice on the other end said smoothly, "without financial enforcement of the marital agreement." No apology, no admission, just strategic phrasing. "And confidentiality?" my attorney asked. "A full non-disclosure clause would be expected." I leaned forward slightly. "Mutual confidentiality," my attorney replied. "No selective silence protecting one party." There was a pause long enough to feel intentional. "We will review that request." Translation: they were recalculating. When the call ended, Ethan rubbed his hands over his face. "So they're backing off?" "They're protecting the company," I said, "not her." 2 days later, we filed for annulment in Travis County. Grounds: duress, emotional coercion, and material misrepresentation. The petition included the recording, the text messages, the timeline of the prior lawsuit settlement, the prenup's reputation clause. When Ethan signed the paperwork, his hand trembled slightly. "I can't believe it got this far," he murmured. "It only got this far because you trusted someone who weaponized that trust," I said gently. Within 48 hours, Olivia filed an objection. Her legal team claimed emotional distress. They framed the wedding incident as a defensive reaction to verbal provocation, but they didn't deny the prenup's terms. We released a carefully selected excerpt of the recording through our attorney. The video worked out better than expected. That line alone shifted the conversation. News anchors replayed it beside the wedding footage. Commentators dissected tone and timing. Public sentiment turned again. Then the Grant family issued another statement. Olivia would be stepping down from executive responsibilities pending internal review. They emphasized ethical governance and corporate accountability. It was corporate language for distancing. Mom read the statement twice before looking up at me. "They're cutting her loose," she said quietly. "They're cutting risk," I corrected. The court hearing was brief. The judge listened to arguments, reviewed documentation, and asked pointed questions about the circumstances under which the prenup had been signed. When he granted the annulment within 4 months of the marriage license, the room felt strangely still. "The agreement is declared unenforceable due to evidence of coercive context," he stated. "No financial penalty, no equity transfer, no $3 million claim." Ethan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Olivia did not appear in court. She sent representation. By evening, the headlines shifted again. Annulment granted in viral wedding case. Prenup clause voided amid coercion claims. At dinner that night, the atmosphere in my parents' house felt unfamiliar, quieter, softer. Mom set down her fork and looked at me. "I was so focused on appearances," she said, "on aligning with power. I didn't see the risk right in front of us." Dad cleared his throat. "I should have questioned it," he admitted. "I assumed wealth meant stability." Ethan met my eyes. "You saw it," he said simply. "You read the fine print." I shrugged lightly. I read what no one else wanted to read. A week later, Ethan announced he was relocating to Denver. "Fresh start," he said. "New investors, no Grant shadow." "You'll rebuild," I told him. "I will," he agreed. "But next time, I hire my own lawyer." We laughed softly. It felt like release. Olivia's name continued to trend for a few more days before fading into quieter headlines about corporate restructuring. Her board seat was gone. Her public narrative fractured. The marriage lasted less than 4 months. The consequences would last much longer. As for us, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the daughter told to stay home to protect the family image. I was the one they turned to when the image cracked. And this time, I didn't shrink. I stepped forward. 6 months later, I stood at the front of a small conference room in downtown Austin. looking at a circle of women who had chosen to spend their Thursday evening talking about financial boundaries. "I wasn't invited to my brother's wedding," I began. "And that wedding went viral for the wrong reasons." A few of them smiled gently, already recognizing the story. What I told them wasn't about the slap. It wasn't even about the annulment. It was about paperwork. It was about how control doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives bound in legal language, dressed as protection, framed as love. I used to shrink myself to fit my family's version of refinement. I used to believe being quiet made things smoother. The truth is, silence only makes manipulation easier. When my mother told me I would embarrass everyone, she thought she was protecting a social alliance. She thought proximity to wealth meant safety. Now she sits in a therapist's office every week unpacking why image mattered more to her than instinct. That alone feels like a revolution. Our Sunday dinners are different now. There's less performance, fewer rehearsed compliments, more uncomfortable honesty. Mom apologizes when she catches herself prioritizing optics over truth. Dad asks questions instead of assuming answers. Ethan calls from Denver every week. His renewable energy project is growing again, slowly but steadily, this time backed by investors who respect transparency. "I confused charm with security," he told me once. "I won't make that mistake again." Neither will we. As for Olivia, her name eventually drifted out of headlines. The board removed her permanently. The company protected itself. They always do. I don't celebrate her downfall. Consequences are not celebrations, they're corrections. The real victory wasn't watching her lose a title. It was watching my brother keep his future. It was watching my mother admit she had been wrong. It was realizing I was never the embarrassing daughter. I was the only one willing to read the fine print. I learned something I wish someone had told me years ago. Revenge doesn't have to look like destruction. Sometimes revenge looks like understanding the contract before you sign it. Sometimes it looks like refusing to let someone turn your love into leverage. Sometimes it looks like standing still while everyone else panics and asking one simple question: who benefits? The wedding that banned me became the moment that defined me, not because I destroyed someone, but because I refused to let my family be used as collateral. If you've ever been told to stay quiet to protect someone else's reputation, if you've ever signed something because you were afraid to lose someone, if you've ever felt like the inconvenient voice in a room full of performance, I want you to know this. You are not the problem. Your caution is not weakness. Your questions are not disrespect. They are protection. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have walked away and never come back? Or would you have fought the contract like I did? And if you believe knowledge is the strongest form of revenge, stay with me here. There are more stories about family drama, hidden power, legal traps, and the quiet ways women reclaim their worth. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the sweetest victory isn't humiliating someone in public. It's knowing your value so clearly that no one can ever use you as leverage again. This narrative is dramatized for storytelling impact.